I'm grateful. Thank you. It's a genuine pleasure to see you and serve under your chairship, Sir Charles. I'm also grateful to my honourable friend, the member for Swansea East, for calling this really important debate, for her stonking speech as well. There's been excellent contributions, I think, from both sides of the House today. This government's female offender strategy set out some very clear principles that we need to address vulnerability, acknowledge the role of gender, treat women as individuals with the potential to make a positive contribution, and break the cycle of reoffending. We agree totally. To do this, the strategy made clear, and I quote, "Short custodial sentences do not deliver the best results for female offenders." It acknowledged the essential role of women's centres and made clear that when women leave prison, the support they receive has to respond to their complex needs. We agree again. But it's been almost 3 years since the strategy was published, and as we've heard, as many as 6 out of 10 women leaving prison are being released into homelessness. 60%. The strategy is simply not being successfully implemented. Because we know that without a home, it's so much harder finding work. Reuniting with children and family is even more difficult. Meeting probation commitments, accessing healthcare and substance misuse treatment is that much harder. Being without a stable home damages mental health. It destroys life chances and lives. It kills hope. This government has acknowledged that the chance of reoffending can be as much as 50% higher for those they release homeless. But between the 23rd of March and the 31st of August last year, during the height of the first lockdown, more than 3,500 prisoners, including 275 women, were released into homelessness. 65 women were sent out to sleep rough on our streets during those first terrifying months of COVID, on their very first night out of prison. Some of the most vulnerable people in our society effectively sent by the government to sleep on the streets, when the rest of us have been told to stay home, to stay safe, and to protect the NHS. It beggars belief. We have got to acknowledge that outcomes for women leaving prison are frankly terrible. One reason is clearly the lack of accommodation. But another significant reason is the lack of continuity of care for those in need of drug or alcohol abuse treatment when they leave prison. Last year, the national average of continuity in care in England was just 35%. When drug-related deaths are at an all-time high, and when a third of people in prison are there for reasons related to drug use, surely to heavens, continuing treatment outside of prison must be a priority. I'm told there's an ambitious government target to go from this derisory 35% to 75%, but there are simply no details of how that will happen. So I'm hoping that the Minister today will tell us how and when that 75% target will be met. It can't be a surprise to anyone listening to this extremely well-informed debate today that reoffending is rife. For women who have served a sentence of under a year, 73% will be convicted of another offence within a year. If we are to tackle reoffending, if we want there to be fewer victims of crime, then we have to tackle the root causes of that crime. The government's own research tells us that often women in prison are dealing with enormous trauma, caused sometimes by years of abuse. And that's why my honourable friend from Swansea East was absolutely right to highlight the need for women's centres. The evidence is clear. They slash reoffending, they cut crime, and they help many women to heal and create better lives. And unlike short prison sentences for women, they are great value for money. Some women's centres have managed to demonstrate they save £2.80 for the public purse for every pound that's invested. So why is this government planning to spend 150 million on women's prison expansion, but committed just 2 million for women's centres? 75 times more spending on something they've admitted doesn't work rather than spending it on something that does. Why? Let me touch on one aspect of something that we haven't discussed today, which is the specific needs of Black, Asian, Gypsy, Roma and Traveller women, and all of those from other minority ethnic communities. Because we know, the government knows, that projects led by women from a community are best suited to develop effective resettlement within that community. And there's excellent examples like the Kebmat centres in Bradford, but there's just not nearly enough across the country. Why? As we recover from COVID, it's even more important to have additional support in place for women leaving prison. And it's good to see that the government plans to take some action on homelessness for prison leavers. But as we've heard, only 5 of the 12 probation regions are likely to receive some funding for temporary accommodation pilots. It's less than half of our regions, even though the value for money case for better accommodation is overwhelming. Why? And can I just gently point out that London and the South East are 2 of the areas where the problems of prison leaver homelessness are greatest, yet neither is included as a pilot. I've been doing this job for less than a year, but I've already worked out that the Ministry of Justice is frankly, addicted to pilots. But there's no follow through. Time and again, projects proven successful, but simply are not rolled out. The truth is, when it comes to women prison leavers, we need ambition and we need commitment. We need to provide accommodation, and that accommodation needs to be fit for purpose. Women domestic abuse survivors may need to relocate away from their area. Homes often need to be able to accommodate women's children. If these needs ain't met, women don't get a second chance. Their families don't get a chance. And reoffending becomes even more likely. Despite all these facts, the government's announcement on temporary accommodation went out of its way to trumpet just how basic and temporary the planned accommodation for prison leavers will be. So I asked the Minister gently, how will this new accommodation address the specific needs of women leaving prison and the needs of their families? How will it stop the very expensive revolving door? Because I have to ask, is the priority cutting reoffending, cutting crime, or is it about dog whistle politics and cutting costs? Because if it is about cutting costs, the Minister should know it's a false economy. His own research shows that. The lack of approved premises for women around the country has been a huge problem. So how many of the 200 new places planned will be in a specialist women's hostel? When will they be delivered? And where will they be located? Maybe the Minister can inform us today of the progress of the approved premises for women in the Southwest. Another PR announcement, a paltry £6 million for Through the Gate support for prison leavers. But only one of the 16 prisons receiving this funding will be a women's prison, Newhall in West Yorkshire. Why? Frankly, when women are put into prison but not supported to deal with the trauma that they've experienced in their life, the violence they've experienced in their life, or the addiction that has placed them there, when they are released knowing their only option is to sleep on the street, when they are condemned to the revolving door of reoffending because support services for drugs and alcohol just ain't there, it's an injustice. It's government failure. Women are not being given a fair chance to change their lives or their children's lives for the better. And I think this government must demonstrate that they truly understand their own research. They need to demonstrate they have a real commitment and ambition for their own strategy. And they need to begin to create a criminal justice system that truly understands the root causes of women's offending and starts to treat women fairly. Thank you, Sir Charles.